Hey everybody, welcome to episode 6 of The Stare Down. I'm Mallory McCormack, your host, and I am so excited because college football is finally back. So, in honor of my favorite team, I have one question for you. Are you ready? Well, if you are, it's time to sit back, relax, grab a drink or two, and listen to The Stare Down. Obviously, the big topic of this week is going to be football. College football is back. We had week 0 last week. It was okay. Some interesting games. You had Navy Notre Dame in Dublin. You had Hawaii at Vanderbilt. That was a whole mess that we'll talk about later on in terms of Vanderbilt Stadium. But it doesn't matter now because week 1 is here. We've already had some great games on week 1. Utah, Florida was awesome. Don't know what Missouri was doing last night, but it is what it is. It's early on. So, before we get into it though, let's talk world records. This is a sports show with women, so let's give our shout out early on to the women this week. Nebraska versus Omaha, volleyball. 92,003 people in Memorial Stadium on Wednesday night. It was gorgeous. I could not have pictured a better scene to see an entire stadium filled with people cheering on women doing their thing. I don't even remember the last time I've seen Nebraska's stadium that full for football. So I'm really pumped for them. The previous record was 91,648 people. That was actually set in March of 2022 with the UEFA Women's Championship League match in Europe. Prior to the 91,000 record being set, the record was held by the Women's World Cup final from 1999 that was held in LA when 90,000 people watched the US defeat China. So it's really interesting to see that now it's not just soccer that's going to continue to set these records. It's going to be other sports, other women's sports. And I think all of that just adds up to more exposure for women's athletics in general. And I think it's such a good thing for everyone involved. The setup of the event was actually really cool. It was kind of an exhibition. So the first exhibition match was Nebraska Kearney and Wayne State. And then I believe it was actually an NCAA sanctioned match for Nebraska versus Omaha at 7 as like the main event. Nebraska ended up winning, which makes perfect sense when you have 92,000 people who are probably cheering for you, considering it's being held at your football team stadium. But I just thought it was so cool to see everyone there decked out in their red, cheering on all of these women. And then after the matches, there was actually a concert by country singer Scotty McCreery. So they had actually tried to set it up and thought that they would have to bill it as more of a concert with volleyball beforehand. But according to an article from ESPN, when they put the tickets on sale, within 3 days, they had sold 85% of the tickets that were allocated. And that was before they even had a musical act named. So I thought that was really cool that people just bought these tickets to go watch an incredible volleyball match instead. And, it seems like the state of Nebraska really loves volleyball. Obviously, I don't know that the state of Alabama could bring out 92,000 people to go watch a volleyball match. But hey, Nebraska, hats off to you. The even better part about all of this, though, is that all 4 teams got $50,000 to do this. And for them and for those programs, since they are lower profiled programs, that $50,000 is huge. That is game changing. So hats off to everybody from the very beginning who had the idea all the way up to execution. You pulled it off flawlessly. I can't wait to see what you do next year or even in the years to come to try and top it, because I have a feeling it's going to be pretty impressive. So hats off to all of y'all. Now, to my favorite thing in the entire world, college football is back, y'all. So this is my favorite time of the year. I am like a kid on Christmas morning. Forget what Santa brought me. I want to see what summer two-a-days bring me. I want to see the chaos ensue. And buddy, do I think we have some interesting chaos that's going to ensue. So let's start with this. I'm going to make my predictions for each major conference from the Big Ten, the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC, and bless their little hearts, the Pac 12. I want to tell you guys who I think the dark horses are, and I'm ready to go. So buckle up. First off, let's start with the Big Ten. In the East, I think you're going to end up having Michigan win it. As bad as I don't want for Michigan to win it, I just don't see Ohio State being able to pull it out. I don't see Ohio State being set enough in their quarterback. Kyle McCord, he was actually just named this week as the starter, but he wasn't even really named the starter because it was basically he's going to be the first quarterback to take snaps, but Devin Brown is also going to take meaningful snaps. And that's a direct quote. So I just feel like they don't quite have that quarterback situation down. And for Ohio State, that's going to be a big, big problem that I think eventually may come back and bite them. I think Michigan is going to take this whole Jim Harbaugh serving a 3-game suspension. Yes, it's self-imposed, but I think Michigan's going to take that. They're going to use that to motivate themselves. They're going to go out. They're going to just probably bulldoze everybody and just be that big smash mouth Michigan football that I think all of their fans have waited for. I'm also not going to be surprised if you see Jim Harbaugh jump to the NFL next year. I think this is kind of his last hurrah, and I wouldn't even be surprised if he's using that in his own little weird way, because goodness knows he's very, very weird, but I could see him using that as a reason to inspire the team, let them go win it. And then I think they'll end up facing Wisconsin in their championship game. You know, Luke Fickell, yes, it's his first year, but he's going to bring a really interesting look to the Badgers. And that look actually involves Phil Longo. So if you don't know Phil Longo, he has his own new twist on the air raid offense. He actually was at one point the offensive coordinator for Ole Miss. I don't know that he's figured out how to draw up plays where your tight end, looking at you, Dawson Knox, you deserved way better at your time at Ole Miss. I don't know that he's figured out that, you can have good tight ends that can catch touchdowns, because Dawson never did. But I think Phil's going to fit in well to this Wisconsin team. I think starting over for them with Luke, I feel like they're going to have something special. I don't know that anyone on their side outside of Iowa is going to truly challenge them. I mean, if you watched Minnesota at all on Thursday night, Minnesota is definitely not going to challenge them. Iowa might. I think that's just because Iowa is very predictable. You've had your head coach for how many years now? But I think, like I said, I just think Wisconsin's it. I just don't see anybody else challenging them. So, like I stated, Michigan, Wisconsin, they're going to meet in their championship game. That's my prediction. I don't have a prediction yet as to who wins. Gut says Michigan, but you never know. I think the one dark horse when you do get into the Big Ten is going to be Penn State. James Franklin has done a great job there. He has taken them out of the Paterno messiness and brought them back to being a steady program, which is what they really needed. They're going to surprise some people, I think, but at the end of the day, the Big Ten is 3 top teams: Michigan, Ohio State, and Wisconsin. If Ohio State were in the West, I think at the end of the day, you really only have 2 top teams, and that's Michigan and Ohio State. So hate it for you in the East, but sorry, Ohio State. I just think Michigan edges you out over this one. All right, so let's go from the Big Ten to the Big 12. This one is the one that I had to do a little bit more research on just because what my gut says, I didn't want it to agree with everything I've read, but unfortunately it is. If there was ever a year for Texas Tech to do it, this would be it. But it's not going to happen, guys. I'm sorry. Texas is stacked. If you need a miracle, and if a miracle is going to happen, then absolutely, Tech is going to be the team that pulls it off this year. Oklahoma's going to be a little bit better on defense, but I don't think that they're going to be enough to stop Texas or Oklahoma State or TCU. So Texas, to me, is the only team in the Big 12. The problem that they're going to run into is how do they stay on top of their game? How do they not lose sight of what that big prize is at the end of the year in being atop their conference and possibly getting a spot in the playoff? They are not going to have the ability to look past anybody week to week, especially not when they go to Alabama. Now, if they go into Alabama and even if they lose, but they make a really strong showing and Alabama is the Alabama that we all know and are used to, then I think Texas could lose that game to Bama and still possibly make the playoff. But outside of Texas in the Big 12, I just don't see anybody really giving them a run for their money. I think UCF could come in and be a little bit of a dark horse. The problem with UCF is, yes, they have a high potent offense. John Rice Plumlee under Gus Malzahn, that was a great pickup by Gus. He went out, he saw that Plumlee would be able to fit into his scheme, and he went and grabbed him out of the portal. Phenomenal pickup. But where's their defense? Can their defense make the transition to the Big 12 and hang with these teams each week? I don't see it happening. I don't think that UCF has had the big name status that they've needed to be able to recruit that way. They're going to kind of feel a little bit like Vanderbilt in the SEC for a little while, I think. But I think if any team overlooks them, that offense is going to be able to score enough that they could come up and surprise you. So here's a warning to the Big 12. Do not overlook UCF and their offense. It's going to score some points on you. I just don't know that their defense can stop anybody. So again, I think I'm just going to have to go with Texas in this one. Also, just to throw this out here as another reason as to why Texas is probably going to just go run the table. Last week, the Big 12 commissioner, Brett Yormark, he went out and made the dumbest, and I mean the absolute dumbest statement he could have ever said in telling Texas Tech coach Joey McGuire that he, and I quote, better take care of business against Texas. One of my favorite quotes from that, though, came from Steve Sarkisian, and he said, beginning quote, I got a letter from the commissioner about sportsmanship the day before that speech, so I'm trying to figure out what are we promoting to our student athletes? To go say those types of things? I'm not guessing he's going to have his Thanksgiving dinner with us the night before that game. Steve, I fully agree with you on this. You know, I get it, Brett. You're probably upset that Texas and Oklahoma are jumping to the SEC, but they are still within your conference this year. I just feel like it was a very low blow. I feel like it was such just a tacky move on his part. If Greg Sankey ever said anything like that, I would be in my car on the way to Birmingham chewing out his PR person, chewing him out, because you just don't say that. And all he did with that was give Sarkisian the ability to say, hey guys, everybody's out to get us this year. Prove them wrong. They didn't need any motivation, but you just gave it to them. So that's kind of where I feel like if there's any doubt that this is Texas's year, that's kind of that final nail in the coffin for the rest of the Big 12. All right, I had actually planned on talking about the ACC next, but I'm going to hold them off for just a second, and let's go to the Pac-12. Bless their hearts. If you are not from the South, bless their heart is not necessarily a good thing. It is, oh, you poor, poor, sweet babies. I mean, how do I even pick this? They are in shambles, and there is so little motivation for the 4 remaining teams, which now may only be 2 remaining teams in Washington State and Oregon State. But I just don't see anybody really jumping up and making a splash here, or even giving USC or Utah a run for their money. I think it comes down to one of them. Originally, I had said maybe USC, and it wasn't just because of Caleb Williams. It was because of Zachariah Branch, who in his debut in week 0 returned a kickoff for 96 yards for a score, and then also had a 25-yard reception for a touchdown. He's a true freshman. He is fast. I mean, he's super, super fast. Go pull up that film from last week and see what I'm talking about. I think that's going to be really bad for Pac-12 defenses. I ultimately, though, think that Utah is the one who pulls out the Pac-12 crown. You know, Florida came in there last night, and Florida's definitely improved. You know, Mertz as their quarterback, it was a great pickup for them. Their defense, did anybody see the 400-plus pound defensive lineman? Good grief, y'all. That boy is big, but he can move. And so I think it's really interesting to watch how Utah handled the fact that Florida is most definitely improved from last year. And, you know, Utah went to the Swamp and beat them last year. And so I thought it was really interesting to see how Utah adjusted towards knowing that they went out, they got better defensive players since Dan Mullen left them with absolutely nothing in terms of defense. And so Utah handled that really, really well. And not only did Utah handle that really, really well, they did it on the backs of 2 backup quarterbacks. So their all-star starting quarterback from last year tore his ACL, and he's still out with it. He said this week that he felt great, but I understand the holding him out, at least for this game, just to be sure, because you got a 400-pound defensive lineman rolling up on that knee, I don't care who the surgeon is, that's probably not holding up. So smart move on Utah's part to sit him out. But Johnson, who we all thought was going to be like the 3rd string quarterback for Utah, I'm pretty sure in my book, he's now moved up to the backup. And so you have good options either way. You know, he can get it done for you with his legs. You've got a quarterback who can get it done for you with his arm. And then you've got your starter who's still sitting out. So Utah, I think, is the one who just ends up doing this. USC is now my kind of dark horse, but I don't even know that I can really call them a dark horse because all eyes are going to be on them because of Caleb Williams. Everybody wants to see, was the Heisman a fluke? Can he come back and do it? I don't know. He's got a few more weapons now, so I will be interested to see. The other thing about the Pac-12, I think they're going to end up being the most fun conference to watch. One, just because it's going to be interesting to see how the teams that are leaving handle it. Do some of them kind of take a little bit of a back seat and play for, hey, we're about to go make a hell of a lot more money? Or do they play it as, nope, we're going to be the last champion of this? Even if they go play it like that, I don't see anyone beating Utah. I just don't. And so that's going to be interesting to watch. I also think, of course, you have to throw in Neon Dion. I mean, the man lost like 80% of his roster that carried over from last year. Actually, I think it was more than that because I believe they said that there were only 10 players still left. So it's going to be interesting to see how pulling in all of the kids from the transfer portal that he did, especially a lot from JSU, how is that going to translate into the Pac-12? You know, JSU had a great team. Dion built that. But are they at that level yet of Pac-12? I don't know. I think they can be. They're probably going to scare some people, but I don't know that they're going to be able to put the games away. they're going to handle some beatdowns. I mean, they're going to have to. Mentally, how does Dion handle that? How does the team handle that? Because he hasn't really had to handle that as a head coach yet. So that's going to be a fun one to watch as well. But either way, it's Utah. Let's go, Utes. Okay, I have to save the SEC for last, but the ACC this morning decided that they were going to move up in my intrigue level. So the presidents voted, and they are going to extend an invite to SMU, Cal, and Stanford. I talked about this in a previous episode, and the ACC is quite possibly the dumbest conference right now. Why in the world would you ever extend an invitation knowing that you are now not just going to have to deal with your football teams flying to Cal and Stanford, but every other sporting team? Basketball, softball, baseball, the logistical nightmare and the money involved in that was so dumb. Flying to Texas and to play SMU, that's a little bit easier. It's only halfway across the country instead of literally the other coast. But still, I don't know. I don't know what y'all were thinking. To the ACC presidents out there, I really have no idea. I'm pretty sure that Mercury is not in retrograde, but that was just dumb because now Florida State is immediately going to jump. I called it in the previous episode. They didn't turn in their intent to leave for the 2024 season, but you better bet your ass that by the 2025 season, they will either be in the Big Ten or the SEC, and my money's on the SEC. And with them, I think they bring Clemson to the SEC. If they don't, they are stupid for staying. And I just don't see Florida State staying. I get it. They got these three teams at a super cheap price. You're not going to have to give them a ton of money. But Florida State, they are not going to give you what you need, want, or even deserve. So jump now. Just jump. Go ahead. Birmingham is calling you home. Come on home. All right. Now that I've gotten that all out of the way, let's talk who we think wins it. It's Florida State. End of story. They're too good. Norvell has done an incredible job. And I mean incredible. He was actually the coach that when Keith Carter hired Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, I was a little sad that Norvell wasn't talked about more. But I understand now, obviously, why Keith hired Lane. And I think Norvell ended up in the best place for him at Florida State. Florida State now runs the ACC. This is their league for this year and next until they move somewhere else. And then after that, you have Clemson. And I think that if Clemson beats them in the regular season, they still face each other in the championship game. And I just don't think that Florida State would lose to Clemson twice. They actually play them early on September 23rd in the regular season. So that's going to be an interesting game to see because Florida State's got a pretty hard schedule to begin with. They start off this Sunday with LSU, and, they beat LSU last year. I actually see them beating LSU again this year. Can they carry that momentum over? Can they carry it over to September 23rd? I think they really can, but I'm also not going to be surprised if they do get a little bit beat up. Clemson doesn't really get beat up early on in their schedule, and so Clemson maybe has just a little bit of a healthier team and may kind of come up and surprise them in a close game. That's the only way I really see that happening early on in the season, but by the time the championship game comes around, it's going to be Florida State. Outside of that, there are no dark horses in the ACC. It's a little bit like the Big 12, but I think in this case, you kind of have Texas in the Big 12, and they've kind of separated themselves out. You could make an argument, like I stated earlier, for Texas Tech to be kind of that number 2. But I think here, this is probably the conference where you have your top two and then you have everybody else. And it's just slightly more separation than what the Pac-12 is going to have. And that's just because I think the Pac-12 teams are going to be looking ahead to their new homes next year. So I think this is kind of that league where all eyes will be on Florida State and Clemson, and that's it. So with all of that being said, I'll let you take a break. And when we come back, my favorite, the SEC, where it just means more. So hang tight. SEC, SEC. Thank you, Knox Kiffin, for that inspiration. I feel like there's no other way to intro this than that. I hate to say it. Just kidding. No, I don't. To the rest of the world, the SEC is king. And until you can come up and compete with us, we always have been. So at least in recent history, right? Like we've run it. And I just don't see that changing this year. So here are my predictions. In the East, Tennessee or Georgia. In the West, Bama or LSU. My dark horses, South Carolina in the East, Arkansas and Ole Miss in the West. I know. You're going to be like, oh, you're just saying Ole Miss because you're a homer. And yeah, I'm a total homer. Like, don't even try and act like I'm trying to hide it, because I'm not. Like, I think every year this is our perfect season. Okay, maybe I didn't truly think that during some of the years, but like I put out that front that we're the best. But I think this truly is the year where Ole Miss or Arkansas in the West can challenge Alabama or LSU. And we all know that when it comes to the West, it comes down to one game. You know, you look back to 2003 even when Eli was a senior at Ole Miss, and we technically shared the West title with LSU. Obviously, they got to go to the championship game because they won the head-to-head. But that's how the West seems to play out a lot of times. And I think now with NIL and transfer portal, you know, the rest of the West has come up and made it a lot closer between Bama and everybody else. Obviously, you know, LSU won it last year. They went to the championship game and Georgia just had their way with them. But it just showed that the West is becoming more on par with each other. And in the East, I was hoping this was going to be the year that there was a little bit more parity. South Carolina, maybe even Florida. Well, that Florida dream, I'll be honest, it kind of went out the window last night. Poor Mertz. I really just don't think he makes it through the season. Their O-line has some issues. And that's not to take away from Utah's defense, but I worry about Florida a little bit. And I really hope Florida fans don't become so impatient that they run off this coaching staff. I think this coaching staff is actually going to be really good for them long term. But I just don't think that this is the year that Florida jumps back up towards that leader level of the East. I think ultimately the East is going to be decided by who wins the Georgia-Tennessee game. And if it's not, then it's going to be decided by the head-to-heads with Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee, South Carolina. I feel like those are going to be the three games that are going to determine the East. And I think South Carolina, obviously they get a really big test this week with North Carolina. South Carolina wins. End of story. North Carolina has too many holes to fill with losing Longo to Wisconsin and that offense. I just don't see South Carolina's defense being anything more than relentless against that UNC offense. So South Carolina can absolutely come in and disrupt the East and determine who wins it. But let's go back to the West for a second. Where I think this is going to get interesting with Alabama is, first of all, Saban's doing something that he has never done before, and he's not releasing his depth chart until game day. He said last year that's what he was going to do, and he stuck to his word. I know we're all surprised by that Nick Saban is a man of his word and sticking to it and being stone-faced. I'm not. If you've ever paid attention to the man, you know, like that's totally his MO. And it's worked, right? I mean, he has more money than I will ever see in my lifetime, and he has more titles than I will ever know what to do with. So it's worked for him. But I think there's a couple of ways that can be seen. I'm going to go with the pessimistic way first, if I'm an Alabama fan, that there's no clear quarterback separation in that competition right now, which is scary if I'm a Bama fan, right? Because does the rest of your offense have the power to come in and carry you through? You lost Bryce, who was a phenomenal game manager. Phenomenal. Cannot wait to see him go basically do the same thing at Carolina, because Carolina is going to require him to do that. But I think that's going to be a big role to fill. Can either of your quarterbacks jump in and manage the game the same way he did and keep the offense from falling apart? Your defense will be fine. I'm not worried about them. Ole Miss is thankful for Pete Golding. I know y'all are thankful to get rid of him, but we're glad he's ours now. So I think your defense definitely is going to step up and be the star of the show, which is great for a Saban run team. He's obviously that defensive mind. So yeah, like I said, a little bit of a pessimistic view if I'm a Bama fan. There is no clear QB. What I ultimately think, and this is the more optimistic view, is that he truly is just sticking to his guns. He knows that it affects players and their mindsets when they see their spot. They don't think, okay, this is just a first game against Middle Tennessee, so they may be starting someone here to see, are they a viable backup or giving them good quality snaps. I understand his thought process in that. And so I actually see it as a really good thing that he is trying to keep his team focused, keep every single player on that team in the mindset that it doesn't matter who starts. It doesn't matter who's seen as second or third or whatever. If your number's called, you better be ready to go rock and roll. And so if I'm Middle Tennessee, I'm a little scared going into this weekend. I think that Bama's going to beat the ever-loving crap out of them, and I think they're going to do it with that mindset of, look, I'm the next man up, and I'm getting some snaps, so I'm going to go with it. LSU is kind of a little bit of my question mark in the West. I really, really, really just don't see them doing it this year. I don't. And it's not just because I'm not an LSU fan and that Ole Miss and LSU have this rivalry. I mean, living in Alabama, I kind of hate Bama more than I hate LSU until it's obviously time for Ole Miss to play LSU. But it's hard living in this state and being an Ole Miss fan. But I just don't think that Brian Kelly went and made the splashes he needed to in recruiting and in the transfer portal. Now, that's not to say that he didn't get some great talent and fill in some holes for, positions lost to the draft. Walker Howard transferring to Ole Miss in terms of a quarterback, a great solid backup quarterback. But I just don't think he reloaded the way he needed to. And I think this is where him not being there for very long, this only being his second year, I just don't think he's had the ability to recruit a strong enough class to compete with Bama's depth. I just don't. So West prediction, I really see Bama winning that one out. For the East, I'm really, really torn. The Georgia quarterback and then the South Carolina games for both Tennessee and Georgia, and then their head-to-head, that's going to determine it. For my friend Earl, I'll give you the nod for Georgia for now. But your quarterback better be ready to go, because otherwise I think Tennessee is going to take the edge here. And that's even saying that, Tennessee lost Hendon Hooker last year. I I just think Tennessee's got a little bit more depth on that side of the ball. So that one's definitely a toss up, but today I'll give you the edge, Georgia. I think the other interesting question that's going to linger over the SEC is, does the Heisman return? And I really think it could. Obviously, Harold Perkins Jr. from LSU, man, what a scary defensive guy. Like, if I'm an offense and I see him on the field, I'm keeping as many eyes on him as I can, while also trying to watch my blind side, because I think he is the key to that LSU defense. I think in terms of a Heisman candidate, it makes sense if you go back to the fact that the Heisman is supposed to be the best player on a team. And in my mind, what that means is, if you take that player off of that team, do they go as far as they do? Are they as good without them? And without Harold Perkins Jr., LSU is not as good. End of story. But we know how the Heisman feels about defensive players. They won't give it to him, but they probably should. Look, there's a little noise coming out of Oxford. Quinshon Judkins. He led freshman rushers last year. He led the SEC in rushing. If you've seen any pictures of him, thank you, Jesus, for an entire year in the weight room, because the boy put on more muscle. So I think he's ready to take that step from true freshman coming in and surprising everybody to a man playing in the SEC with SEC experience under his belt. It's going to be fun to watch him. Now, this is a shout out to the entire Ole Miss offensive line. Do your jobs. Please do your jobs. I think Jackson Dart is our quarterback, but it's Quinshon's offense. I think they pull in some things this year that showcase him, and they showcase the fact that, like, he can catch, he can block better now. Again, thank you, weight room. So I think it's going to be interesting to see that, and what does that do for his Heisman chances? If Ole Miss does jump up and surprise LSU or Bama, does that put us kind of at the forefront? I mean, Eli didn't win it in 2003. Honestly, without Eli, were we as good? No, but we all knew Eli wasn't going to get it if Peyton hadn't won it. So I think that's going to be an interesting one to watch in terms of the Heisman race. I think he's definitely the dark horse of the Heisman race. Outside of those two, though, I don't know that there are any real Heisman candidates this early on. Now, we all know the SEC will produce someone along the line that will absolutely be deserving to go sit in New York City and have their name called out as one of the top three. So I'm interested to watch that. I'll definitely probably do some updates as the season goes on. But right now, it's Harold Perkins Jr. and Quinshon Judkins. Those are our two best bets to get the Heisman back in the SEC. The other big question that I want to watch, and it's not because I enjoy watching this team. Trust me, that is not it. As my husband said, any school that does not have female cheerleaders should not be allowed in the SEC. Was it a little sexist? Yes. Do I agree with him? Yes. Are the A&M male cheerleaders weird? 100%. I'm sorry, their midnight yell sessions are just cringy. Their quote-unquote jokes are awkward at best. So this is what's going to make the A&M story interesting this year. Does Ross Bjork finally find a way to make the A&M faithful pony up and oust Jimbo? Can he pay it? If he can't, then I think you see A&M oust Ross, and I think you see them oust Jimbo. There is no more Jimbo at A&M after this year. I don't see it happening. He is on too hot of a seat. If they have another year like they did last year, after supposedly pulling in all of these great top 3 recruiting classes, depending on which outlet you look at, I don't see them having a great season. Could they beat Ole Miss? Yeah, I could see us losing to them. Do they scare an LSU? Yeah. Do they give Arkansas a run for their money? Maybe, but I just don't see LSU or Bama losing to them. I just don't. And I think if they get a few hits early on, if the injury bug does anything to them, I think that's it for Jimbo. So maybe this is it. I kind of hope it is, but then I also kind of don't, because I do enjoy beating them and him. And I think that watching Jimbo squirm when trying to be the big man and call out Lane Kiffin and Nick Saban, I think it's hilarious. And I would kind of like to continue to see him cry a little bit, just because it's funny to watch that. But like I said, I think this is the year that A&M, that they just kind of fall apart, and they're going to need to compete with Texas and Oklahoma. Their alumni are going to require that next year once, they're in the SEC and they're all back together. And I don't see Jimbo being that guy. I could talk all day about Ole Miss, but the last thing I'm going to say is Pete Golding, watch his defenses, because Ole Miss is definitely going to be improved there. I feel it in my bones, y'all. I really do. This is a bones day, if you know what that means. But I think that Golding going to work for Lane Kiffin, Lane has handed the reins of the defense over to Pete under the watchful eye of one by the name of Monty Kiffin. And this is just my pure speculation, but I think that Monty is there to serve as an advisor for Pete. Monty is one of the greatest defensive minds in football history, NFL, just football in general. So I think Pete being able to come in, go after all of the talent that we got out of the portal. Suntarine Perkins is a grown man as a true freshman. He is going to make some waves on that defense. I think he is our next Patrick Willis. And I think it ends up becoming in Ole Miss history. You have Patrick Willis, and then you have Suntarine. And so I think that's going to be fun to watch him. But I think the creativity that Pete is now going to be allowed to implement with a defense is going to show his true talent. So I'm interested to watch that. I think it's going to be fun. Our defense is going to be able to stop the Ole Miss offense. I don't know. Is our defense going to be able to stop some of the more potent offenses in the SEC? I don't know. But our first test actually comes in week 2 against Tulane. And that to me is going to say a lot about the rest of our season. So I'll be in New Orleans, and that episode is going to be fun. And then the recap episode is going to be fun as well. The last thing that I will say about the SEC is that it is not going to be the same without Mike Leach. And I think it's really funny that Annie is now barking in the background. Mike Leach is one of a kind, and there's no one that can ever replace him. I think he brought such a fun energy to the game. I think he reminded us all that it is a game. And so to Mississippi State fans, just know that we're with you. We all miss him too. And I think you guys are going to be okay. It's going to hurt, but I think you guys are going to ultimately be okay. All right, now that I have rambled on enough about football, let's make a quick jump to my other favorite thing, which is the U.S. Open. And right now, it is all about Coco. Our girl is killing it. She stood up for herself in her match on Monday night when Sigmund did not want to play by the rules, basically. She didn't let it get to her. She walked over to the umpire's chair and in a very mature way stated her case, explained that it was not cool, that there were inconsistencies happening. And as my friend Camille pointed out, she was professional and she was in charge. She may be one of the youngest players out there that's really making waves, but she sounded anything but young. And so I am excited to see her go through this U.S. Open. I think this is her breakout year. And I think that she could absolutely do it. Her dramatic pause in the post-match interview when they asked her, what her feelings were on the match, and she said, slow. But her little dramatic pause with it. She's also growing up and understanding that the crowd can be on your side, and especially at the US Open, she now has them in the palm of her hand, and Coco, go use it. That will take you to the finals. And then once you're there, it's yours to lose. So come on, Coco, let's go. Skipping to the men's side, I love Francis Tiafoe. I just like rooting for him. He's got such a youthful energy to him. He brings spunk to the game. He's hard on himself. He's just a scrappy kid from the DC area who just wants to go put U.S. men's tennis back on the map. And I love it. He knows it's time that an American wins again. I think he is the most poised men's tennis player in America right now to go and do that. The problem is he still has to think about Djokovic, and I think Joker ends up winning it. I don't want him to. I think after Joker losing Wimbledon, I think he wants to end the season on a high note, and I think Joker wins it. But Tiafoe, hopefully you can hear me all the way in Flushing Meadows yelling from Alabama for you. So let's go Coco and Tiafoe. The U.S. is behind you. All right, so that's all of the main content for this week. Now we've got Don't Flinch. And my first thing for Don't Flinch this week is I flinched. I have to make an apology to Maddie Summerfield, not Maddie Summer, as I called her in last week's episode. She's a rock star. Maddie, my apologies. I still love your walkout song. I went and made sure it was added to my liked playlist so that anytime I'm walking or running, it's going to play. So you rock. Can't wait to see you soon. And then my second one is I flinched and called the Pouncey twins the Chauncey twins. My total bad. I think in my mind I got them mixed up with, I was trying to say Chris Rainey being someone that I loved watching, and then the Pouncey twins. And anyway, they are the Pouncey twins, not the Chauncey twins. So, but it's Florida. Who cares? Let's move on. My second Don't Flinch, and I mentioned it early on in the episode, Vanderbilt. Bless their hearts. Their stadium, the construction is a mess, honey. It's just a mess. It's not finished, and that's, again, an understatement. Messy is also probably an understatement, but they are doing something incredibly, incredibly classy, and they beat Hawaii 35-28 in week 0, and they are actually taking a portion of the proceeds from the game and donating it to the Maui Strong Fund. I think that is the right move. I think it is beyond sports, and here at the Stare Down, that's what we're all about. You know, we're here to make sure that people understand that sports are fun and all of that, but I've said it once and you'll hear me say it a million other times. There are people on the island of Maui that have lost everything, and maybe the Hawaii football team is the reprieve they need from reality to enjoy something for a minute. So Vanderbilt giving back part of the proceeds, I think that was just that classy move. They didn't do it to bring a lot of, praise and gain on themselves as a university. They just did it because it's the right thing to do, and they showed that it's bigger than football. And so hats off to you, Vanderbilt. All right, so that's all I've got for you today. As always, you can find us at thealabamaTake.com, and I actually encourage you to go there today for 2 separate reasons. One, there's a blog post that goes along with this post, and it gives a shout out to my friend Tim and his wife Anna, because Anna was the inspiration for the name of this episode, which is E230. I loved it. E230 is actually the number of my nail color. That is the most perfect powder blue for Ole Miss, any sporting event, and it's the color I always get at my nail salon. So Anna was like, that'd be a great name for an episode. So that's why this is called that, because the other name for the episode was going to be, oh my God, college football is back. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I didn't feel like that was a good one. So thanks, Anna. Blog post goes a little bit more into that. Also, the blog post on the Alabama Take that will be up later today is my first week doing the picks with TD and Blaine. Thanks, guys, for letting me join in on this. You will see my picks 3 games against the spread this week. Who I think is the outright winner, what you should do against the over-under. I don't know that if you're actually going to bet money that this is a smart thing to read, because if I lose you money, I'm really, really sorry. I'm not paying you back for it. However, if you win money because of my picks and my suggestions, I encourage you to go buy some Stare Down merch. And that link can also be found at thealabamatake.com. You can also always find us on Instagram at @thestaredown_podcast, on Twitter at @thestaredownpod. You can shoot us an email at thestaredownpod@gmail.com and find us on Facebook by searching for The Stare Down. So until next week, you know what to do. Sit back, relax, grab a drink or two in your red Solo cup for tailgating, listen to The Stare Down, cheer for your team, and be so thankful that college football is finally back. Hotty toddy, y'all. Beat Mercer. Have a good one.